Now, in this demonstration, we'll take a look at using some string comparison functions, and we'll start out with just some syntactical examples, if you will, but I will show you a few examples of practical implementations. So the first one is the string compare function, or strcmp, and it will first of all just compare two entries that you give it, and will tell you essentially whether or not they are the same. So we can see in the first example here, I'm selecting the string compare function against value 1 and value 2, and they are identical in this case. I'm simply aliasing that as result, but if they are identical, the result is 0. And that might seem to be a little bit misleading, but let's just go ahead and execute. And you can see there is the result, 0. Now, a 0 kind of suggests that they aren't the same, but of course they were. Test text was passed in for both arguments here, so they are identical, but the result says 0. Well, let's take a look at what happens when you pass in values that aren't the same. Now you can see my first value is test underscore text versus test text, all one word. And the result here is interestingly going to be -1. Now let's execute. And we see -1. So that might suggest, okay, these aren't the same. And that's true. But again, look at the third example here. I've just reversed the two arguments. Now test text, all one word, is being passed in first against test underscore text being passed in second. So note the comments here. It's concerned about whether or not the string is larger than the other. Okay, so the first one compares two strings where the first entry is larger. This one compares two strings where the second entry is larger. And this one results in a 1. So we'll execute this, and we see a 1. So again, those results are a little bit difficult to decipher in some cases, but 0 essentially can be treated as there is 0 difference between those two values. Okay, so 0 is identical. -1 says they are not the same, but the first one was larger. +1 also says they are not the same, but the second one was larger. Okay, so again, it compares certainly whether or not they are the same, but then also considers quite simply the number of characters. Now, here's a practical example. And what I've done here is I've actually gone to the customer table and I have intentionally given someone the same name for first and last name. So maybe that was just a typo. Maybe I was just copying and pasting and got a little careless, and I put in the same value for both names. Okay, so we can locate that. So we can select the string compare against the last name and the first name column. It doesn't matter the sequence here. So let's go ahead and select. And we see the first record returns a 0, meaning they are identical. But then we see the differences, of course, the variances in people's first names and last names. And it's just saying that one of them is longer than the other. So that's not, particularly useful in this case, but the 0 finds where you do have the exact same value in both columns. So I could include a where clause here and say where this comparison, I'll just copy this whole thing and paste it in, equals 0, and I'll see only values that are the same. There is the customer. And of course, I could include the customer ID, include the two names as well, so I can simply find those values where something is identical in both columns. Now, these examples here are using like and not like operators, so they don't quite behave the same as functions, and in fact, we've seen the like operator in a where clause. But you can use it like a function, if you'll pardon the pun there. But in this case, again, I'm just passing in two values, hello and hello, which are identical, and seeing the result. And in this case, I get a 1. Okay, so let's execute here. The 1 tells me those two values are the same. And I can reverse that logic by putting in different values, hello and hello misspelled, but then not like. If they are not like each other, this will also return a 1. Okay, so this is just essentially doing the same thing, but from a different perspective. So if I were to just put a typo up here in my first one and re-execute, these are no longer the same, so they are not like each other. Let's execute, and we get a 0. Okay, so those are just flat out 1 or 0 responses. So again, in the practical example, I'm selecting out the actual first name and the last name. Then, is the first name like the last name? As an alias, simply saying, is it the same name? From the customer table, and let's see what we get. So where I see that duplicate first name and last name, yes, the 1 indicates that is the same name. Okay, and again, I could filter for just the ones if I wanted to try to find any errors in the table. Okay, but essentially, you are just using those functions to compare strings. And the like versus not like is just flat out, are they the same or are they not the same? The string compare does essentially give you the same answer, but then also considers how long each string is and tells you which one is longer than the other. So those are some basic string comparison functions.